Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Mo tonight. Mo's an individual that reached out through a YouTube comment, and then thankfully we were able to be connected as I responded to that comment. And Mo has agreed to come on the show to share what she's experienced over the years. So Mo, welcome to the show. I'm going to go ahead and give the floor over to you. Feel free to take us back to the time when all this stuff started happening for you, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right. When I was a very little girl, sometime around 1975, my parents decided to leave civilization and move up into the mountains. And I was about 5 years old, maybe 6. And we moved up to a very, very large, very beautiful log cabin up past Granite Falls, Washington, up by the 16-mile marker. And we had no electricity. We cooked on a wood stove, and it was just very remote at the time. And there's a lot of people up there now, I think, but it was very different then. But yeah, one summer we'd been living up there. I think this was in 77, and we'd been living up there for a while. And we had never heard or seen. We'd seen bears and things like that, but nothing else. And it was, I believe it was June, and me and my father had decided to go, and all the other kids were gone for the day, and we decided to go and do something, and he decided it was time for me to learn how to fish. So we grabbed some poles, and there was a place that everybody liked to fish, and it was about a mile walk from our house, and we crossed the road and go down a dry creek bed for about a mile. And there was a bend in the Stillaguamish River there that it pooled right there at the turn in the river. And we called it Emerald Pool. It was just a really beautiful spot. And it was a rocky beach. And then on the other side, there was a little waterfalls and a big cliff. And the cliff was about, I'd say 50 feet. 50 feet tall, maybe a little taller. So we walked out there, and it was a nice walk. And we set up our fishing poles and sat down to fish, and we were there for about 2 hours. And I did catch my first fish. And I saw my dad kind of stiffen and get a really strange look on his face and set up off the ground, off the rock he was sitting on. And I looked over towards the cliff where he was looking. And standing there was, at first I thought it was just a really big guy wearing lots of clothes. But I could see that my dad was terrified. And I mean, he was just frozen. And so, looking closer, I realized that this was way too big to be a man. It was probably close to 8 feet tall, covered with brown hair, looked very ape-like, and was staring down at us. And my dad, I don't know what he was going through at the time, because he just couldn't move. He was just frozen. And he stood that way for a good couple of minutes. And I said, "Dad, what is that?" And he said, "Honey, I don't know what that is. I think I know, but I don't know, and I think we need to leave." And I looked up, and I took one last look at it, and it was standing there, and it kind of had its hand on the trunk of a tree, and it was looking down at us. And I remember thinking how sad it looked. For some reason, it just seemed to have a very, very sad look on its face. So me and my dad turned around, and we walked back home as fast as we could. And I don't think it could have gotten to us unless it jumped off the cliff and waded through the river, but he was afraid. And we got back to the house, and that night we started hearing things around the outside of the house. And the way when we went to bed at night, my mom would come into my bedroom and she would light the kerosene lantern and she would turn the wick up only so far so that way within a couple of hours it would burn out. And I can remember that for a lot of nights after that night, we would hear branches breaking, we would hear screaming, just howling that we had never heard before. Then I would hear breathing outside of my window. And I would wake up and hear this, and I would be terrified. And because the lantern had burned out in my room and it was completely dark in there, I can remember I would feel around the walls of my room because I had to get out of there because it was right outside my window. And I didn't know what it was, but I could tell it was big, and I had never heard anything like that before. And I would finally find the door, and then I'd run out to the living room and sleep on the couch that night. And I could still hear it, but the living room was 2 stories up, so it was, I felt a little safer there. And we started having things around our house being destroyed, like plant. My mom had a garden. My dad had his own garden. We won't go into what he grew, but those would disappear as well. But it was scary. It went on pretty much for the rest of the time that we lived there, which was a couple of years. And I do remember there were times when there was enough moonlight to shine light into my bedroom window, and I could see something out there, and it looked like what I saw up at Emerald Pool. And we also had a small house right next to our property. And it was the strangest little house because I don't know why it had been built where it had been built, but it was like surrounded by a pond. I don't know if the pond gathered there after the house was built, but it was a very old, little tiny cabin. And above the door, there was a little sign that said Dr. Zhivago. And us kids loved to explore around in there. We weren't supposed to, but we really liked to. And I can remember when I would go in there, I would smell a smell that would take me back to the nights when, there's something outside my window and I could hear it and I could smell that strong, almost nose burning smell. And I can remember there was many times when I could smell that inside that cabin. And so we stopped playing in there. But it went on for the next couple of years that we lived there. I can't even begin to describe the noises that it made. My dad would try and tell all the other kids that, it was just a bear or a cougar or mountain lion or whatever. But I knew what it was. And I can remember my dad wanted me to keep what we had seen that day from my mom because my mom's scared easily. But after it started like showing up around our house at night, there was no way my mom wouldn't hear that and see those things herself. She was up late in the night. My mom always got up in the middle of the night for some reason for an hour or two. And she would see and hear things too. And she would always ask my dad, are you sure that's a bear? It sounds so big. Are you sure that's a bear? And what is that smell? What is the smell I keep smelling around the house? Well, my dad finally told her what we had seen at Emerald Pool that day. And then we had a couple of neighbors up there, one that lived across the river and one that lived right across the road. And then we were the only ones up there. And so the guy who lived across the river, his name was Greg. And my dad went to him and talked to him about what he had seen. And Greg started telling stories because Greg lived up in that little cabin that he lived in up there for most of his life. And he told us all sorts of stories about what he had seen and that there's many of them up there and that he had seen them all of his life. And yeah, that's my story.
That is absolutely fascinating, Mo. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely have a few questions for you. Um,
Hmm.
Going back to when you had seen the one where its face made you think it was sad, do you remember if there were certain details about the face that made you think that?
Yeah, the eyes, it just seemed to have sad eyes, almost like it was crying. I don't know. I couldn't see tears. I was too far away. It just, it, it looked like an old person who you see that was pouting or looking really sad or looking kind of, and its shoulders were slumped and it seemed to sigh a few times. And it's hard to explain. It just really looked like it did not want to see us there, but that it wasn't angry or violent. It just looked sad. It had kind of a leathery face, brown leathery face, all wrinkly, and it just had a sad, scrunched up look on its face.
What were the certain features that stood out to you as being more ape-like?
The face, the hands, from as far away as, I mean, we weren't that far. The Emerald Pool was actually very small, but the hands looked like an ape's hands, the hair on the back of the hands, but none on the front sides. I couldn't really see its feet, so I don't know, but the hair was brown, but it was kind of an orangey brown. And it had really long arms, kind of bowed legs. It was just really ape-like.
Were you able to see any details about shape of the head or the neck at all?
Yeah, the head reminded me of like a gorilla head, just darker skin, darker hair, but it looked a lot like a gorilla head. I couldn't see the back of it, but it did look like a gorilla head. And if I am remembering correctly, I I also think, I mean, in my memory, I think it was a male because I think I saw some of that too.
Gotcha.
And there
And
were no large breasts or anything.
from what I can tell, Granite Falls, there are not a lot of people at this time, so you're not having to worry about, is there a zoo in Granite Falls or is there wild animal safari theme park, that there could have been a gorilla escape from. Nothing like that in the area, correct?
No, no, it was a little tiny logging town.
Absolutely. When you would walk around the property after these nights where you would hear things outside, would you ever notice any footprints outside or anything out of the ordinary next to the house?
I don't think I ever really thought to look because I was so young, but I remember my dad looking around the house after those nights, and I never really, fully understood what he was looking for, but I think I know now. He never really talked about it a lot. It was something that really scared him. He was one of those very skeptical people. He did not believe in anything out of the ordinary. Life was just very straightforward for him. So it's something that he just never really liked to talk about too much. But when he did talk about it, he agreed with me that about what it looked like and about that it had a sad look on its face. And when he finally started telling people about it, it just this thing happened that he always thought would happen. They told him he was crazy, except for our couple of friends up there on the mountain. But nobody ever believed us. My brothers and sisters barely believed us, even though they heard what went on outside. But at that time, a lot of them were leaving home and going off on their own too, and it was pretty much just us little kids left. But
That makes sense. Did you and your father have a discussion about this when you were older and grown up as an adult?
actually, we had a discussion about it about, well, less than a year ago. I talked to him about it. I wanted to talk. His mind was slipping, and I wanted to talk to him about things before, he passed away in September, and then my mom, and I wanted to talk to him about it, and he said, he goes, I saw him afterwards. I saw them after that. I don't know why we never saw them before. Maybe we just weren't looking. And we don't know why they started coming around our house after we did see them. We did see that one. I know that there was times when I would lay there and I would think, oh, there's one outside the window. And then I would realize there was more than one outside the window. We never had anything like a lot of people describe, no rocks thrown, nothing ever threatening. We never heard any strange languages or anything like that. Just a lot of heavy breathing. And then when they were a little farther from the house, screaming or kind of a woot woot sound at each other, I think. I think there was more than one. They'd be woot wooting at each other. That's the only way I can describe it. But yeah.
First off, I'm sorry to hear that you lost both of your parents recently. That is great. You were able to have that conversation with your father so recent before he did pass.
Yeah.
How long did they end up staying at that property?
For 2 more years after that. We were there for about 4 years in total.
Was there a thing that made them move, or it was just at the point that it's time to move on?
It was time to move on. Living up there was becoming a little more than what my mother bargained for. Oh, and my sister told me, because I was telling her that I was doing this tonight, and she told me something that she had never told me before. And that was that once during the summer, and she said this was about 77, my grandparents had a little trailer that they lived in on our property in the last couple of years that we lived there. And one day she was walking towards the trailer and she was on one side of it, and my grandpa looked out the window and said, "Don't come around to the other side of the trailer. Get your ASS back in the house." And she's like, "Whatever." And she walked around the side of the trailer and she said she saw a Bigfoot standing by the trailer. And my grandpa had come over to the other side of the trailer and he was looking out the window at her and at this thing standing there. And he said, "Get in the house now." And she turned around and she ran, and it watched her. He said it watched her running, and then it turned her back around and looked at him and then just walked away. My grandpa never told me about this. I can remember my grandma mumbling something about it after she was, her mind was a little bit gone, but grandpa didn't talk about a lot of things, so I'm not real surprised he never said anything. But my sister was telling me about that today, and I didn't even know about that.
That is absolutely fascinating for you just to learn that today. Was she able to describe what she saw, and was it similar to what you described?
She described exactly what I described, and I hadn't even described, it had been a long time since I'd said anything. I don't even know if I'd ever talked to her much about it because my dad was so strange about it. But, and she was one of those, there's bears out there. There's nothing out there until that day. So, but she described it just like I described it. And she also said that when her and, because the family across the road from us, they were the only other kids up there. But they had the same amount of kids as my parents, and we were all around the same age. So we each had kind of a buddy we hung out with. And her and their older kid, they were out playing with weapons. I don't know whose, but apparently, and this isn't another thing she told me today. I wasn't sure if I was going to say anything about this or not, but apparently the neighbor boy fired at one in the woods. And it scared her really bad. It ran away. I don't know what to think of that story. I mean, I don't think my sister would lie to me, but I wasn't, I wasn't sure if I wanted to tell that one or not, but what the heck, we're here. But she said she had also smelled things in that cabin when her and the neighbor boy would go in the little Dr. Zhivago cabin to be alone. they would smell that smell in there and they would notice things. And she said she did see footprints occasionally.
That's absolutely fascinating.
My other family members, really, there's a couple that I really don't talk to much anymore. But so I've never, and they were the older ones who were gone pretty much by the time all this was happening, off starting families of their own. And so I've never really asked them if they saw anything, because when, I talked about my story, they didn't believe us. They just, oh, you guys are seeing bears. You're hearing cougars. But we know we weren't hearing cougars and bears. we knew that's not what they sounded like. Because, we knew what they sounded like. My dad was a very good outdoorsman, and he knew what he was hearing.
This home, this cabin area, did your father and your family did you build that as you were moving on, or was the cabin already there?
It was already there.
Do you know how long it had stayed vacant for before you moved into it?
I have no idea. I don't think it was vacant long, because the landlord, my parents actually, we didn't own it. We rented it. And the landlord had been living up there, and he decided he wanted to move to town and rent the place out. And he thought about renting it out as like a summer rental or something, but he knew my parents knew him somehow, and he agreed to rent the place out to them.
I wonder if there was ever a conversation between your dad and this landlord, something to the effect of, hey, there's Bigfoot on the property that you're renting to me. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know. I don't know if he ever did talk to him about it. The only adults I remember talking about it, like I said, were my dad and his two friends up there, Greg and Les. Les is the one across the street with all the kids, and those are the only people my dad was ever willing to talk to. A few relatives, a few of the younger relatives. When he'd get a few drinks in him, he'd regale the youngsters with a story or two, but they always thought he was just drunk and telling stories. I would tell them, no, it's true, I was there, and they'd be like, yeah, okay, you're cute.
Wow.
People who live up the Mount Loop know. They know.
Absolutely. Was there anything ever left near the house that just didn't really make sense, or maybe parts of animals, or just really weird things like that?
No, nothing like that. At least not that my dad said.
Gotcha. That's true. If there had been, there's a good chance he could have taken care of it because you were so young at the time.
Yep.
Do you ever remember seeing any, like, lots of broken trees or bent over trees, anything like that around the property?
Yes, definitely around the house. Sometimes we'd see trees that were broken or branches that were broken so high up that it would scare my mother. It would really scare her, because my dad would, it's the spares, Mary, it's okay. And she knew he was lying, and he finally admitted to her, what was going on. And she's like, well, I already knew that. But it was like they always wanted to pretend that it wasn't happening, because that's what my parents did. My parents were perpetual 12-year-olds, and they just, life was wonderful all day long and nothing bad ever happened. So that's how they wanted to live their life. But everybody knew, everybody knew deep down what was going on. And then, we also had a thing go on in our house where we kept finding food inside the house disappearing. And then we were finding clothing disappearing. And then one day I discovered this little doorway upstairs. The house wasn't completely finished, and a couple of the rooms were just kind of framed in, but there was a real big space between a couple of rooms. It was just like empty space, but it was kind of set back. And then there was this wooden wall, and I noticed this little door in it. And so I decided to peek in there one day, and there was a 16-year-old girl living in the wall that she had been there for a few weeks, and she had run away from home. So that was crazy. It was quite the house.
All right. God, that's an absolute nightmare. I'm trying to. So, did you find that individual yourself?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Me and my two sisters were home alone one day, and we found her, and we coaxed her out of there, and we sat her down in the kitchen. My big sister did, and made her stay there until my parents got home, and my parents took her down and into town to the police station. She was just a runaway. Found her
Okay.
way in to our wall.
Yeah, I mean, she's like, hey, I can get in there unfinished. It's kind of like a
Yeah.
Goldilocks type situation. So it was pretty obvious that she was a human runaway, though. Like, she could talk.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah.
any like
Yeah,
feral
she was
human
she
type
was a
thing.
local girl.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
She was a local girl.
I was not expecting that. That's a little twist in the story there.
That was just something that popped up in my head.
Did your dad finish the house after that? I would be like, all right, time to finish the house.
No.
No? Okay.
My dad, when I was really young, my dad was rear-ended in his work truck by a very large semi, and he was in the hospital for many months after that. And although he would always try and get jobs or do some kind of, work for himself or things like that. He would always end up back in the hospital for doing too much. And so that was another reason why they wanted to live, up in the mountain, do subsistence living, I guess. And it got too hard on them. They just couldn't do it anymore. So down to town we moved.
When you moved down to town, did you start hearing stories from other people in town about people that had also been seeing Bigfoot in the area?
Oh yeah. I made friends with a girl in town. We became best friends. We are pretty much still to this day. And she knew some people that they had some kind of touristy little business thing up in Monte Cristo, an abandoned silver mining town or something that was up there. And she would go up there and stay with some friends up there all the time. And it was like it was like a ski resort or something. And she would hear stuff all the time from people about, oh, hey, they'd come into the office and be like, or into the lobby of this ski place and be like, hey, we just saw something. And, nobody ever knew what to say. It's like, yeah, a lot of people see things. But, campers have always seen things, people coming into town. Hey, you should see what we saw up there. We saw a Bigfoot, I swear, we saw a Bigfoot. And it's still to this day, people see him up there above Granite Falls.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've heard a few of those on this show for sure, but the area definitely has things going on. It sounds like no one ever experienced any weird health ailments on the property. Nothing that could be attributed to like infrasound or anything like that.
No.
Gotcha.
Nothing like that. Like I said, there's a lot of things that I've heard from other people. And as far as I know, as far as from what I saw and what I heard, and what I've heard from people that I know from the area, it's just seems like some offshoot of apes or humans or whatever that just lives in the woods and keeps away from us as much as possible. I don't know about some of the other stuff I hear people say, like they from another dimension or that they can walk through portals. I know nothing about any of that kind of stuff. What I saw seemed completely natural to me. just like anything else out in the woods. It's a little scarier.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, man, that would push me over the edge if like I was already amped up about Bigfoot being outside my house, and then I find a person hiding in the walls upstairs. Holy mackerel! I would be just messed up for life. I can't believe you're as good as you are, but there you go.
My parents were very, very good at handling situations.
That's great. That's very good. Do you have any advice for people that might be in similar situations right now where they have Bigfoot currently on their property?
I don't know, except that, that they were up there first. Try and be understanding of them. Like I said, when I saw that thing's face, it actually made me sad. It was sad to see us. Leave them alone. If they're not hurting you, don't hurt them. If they're coming around your house and whooping and hollering, like my dad said it, he always just thought it was a way of saying, just stay away from us and leave us alone. And they're going to remind us frequently to just, mind our P's and Q's. That's about all I can say. I was so young when all that happened, and I was terrified when it did. Like I said, I would run around my room at night trying to get out of my room because my room was on the first level and it faced the woods. I mean, there was like trees 2-3 feet from my window. It was thick woods. So, that, like I said, that's their home. And it feels weird to say this kind of stuff because it feels weird to know that I saw that. And over the years, with so many people not believing you or calling you crazy, you start asking yourself, was I crazy? But my dad wasn't, and he saw it too. And so all I can say is, if they're not hurting you, leave them be.
I think that's great advice, Mo. I just want to say thank you for coming on the show to share what you experienced through that part of your life, and just to make sure that there wasn't anything else that you wanted to share before we close things out for tonight.
There is one kind of piece of advice that I'd like to give people.
Sure.
If you're going to be going up onto the Mount Loop, whether it's camping, hiking, hunting, fishing, be very, very, very careful because the bears and the Sasquatch aren't what's dangerous up there. It's the people up there now. And there's some people that live on the Mount Loop or that stay on the Mount Loop, and there's things that have happened there. People are the worst monsters in the world. So just be careful when you're on the Mount Loop. On the Granite Falls side, once you get over to the Darrington side, it's a little calmer, but above Granite Falls, be really careful. And that's about it.
I think that's great. Sounds like great advice. Is that so I'm personally not familiar with, is that a highway you can be on or is that a trail you can hike?
The Mount Loop Highway?
Oh, okay. So it's, even if you're on this highway, people can still be messing with you, is what you're saying.
Yeah. In the camping grounds and
Okay.
and if you're out in the woods playing, just randomly out in the woods, hiking, we've had murders up there. We've had, and there's people who live up there that just, if you're going to go up there, go real far. That's, go at least 20 miles up past town. Because that's kind of the, danger zone there.
That's good advice. Always be prepared to survive, but also to protect yourself against bears, cougars, potentially Bigfoot, and one of the most dangerous predators of all, which would be human beings. Great advice. And Mo, thank you so much for coming on the show. Don't be afraid to reach out if there's anything else that you would like to share, but I really appreciate you coming on tonight.
No problem.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.